Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Nate. I am responsible for putting all this together. My team has been really doing most of the work. I just show up and eat some pizza and do some talking, and then take all the credit. I'm so excited to have our special guest here today. Really, he's going to say this himself, but you are the special guest. This is a topic and a movement that is really near and dear to our hearts because we experience ADHD on a regular, daily basis, if not a minute-by-minute basis. And we all need, from all walks of life, we all need somebody who can inspire us, kind of open our eyes to see that we're not alone, and that we don't have to live in the margins. And that we can live our lives how we want to live them. That greatness, and a lot of times is an opportunity that knocks on your door, sometimes knocks you over, and takes over your life. If you run with it, then you go places. I'm pleased to introduce the person who is going to introduce this special guest. He is one of my great friends, who's become a great mentor and advisor. His name is Ryan Erickson, and he is the COO of Kids on the Move, which is one of the largest nonprofits in the state that serves 38,000?
3,800.
3,800. Oh, wow. Well, there's your new goal. Kids with disabilities all throughout the state. And they provide educational, academic support services, respite care, daycare, and everything in between. This is a tremendous story that started with two mothers who had Down syndrome kids that saw that they weren't getting the services that they needed. And so they, like we like to do in Utah, lifted themselves up by their bootstraps and just figured it out how to provide better services for them. And that's really the essence of who we are in this area. So I'm pleased to introduce, please welcome to the stage, Ryan Erickson.
Woo, Ryan! Thank you guys all for coming. It is actually it's an honor of mine to be able to introduce Mr. Stephen. He is an amazing guy. Like you guys all know who he is. But this guy, I think they call him, he is a rock star. He is a YouTube sensation. He's a chart topper and a cellist kind of thing, right? I think so. But he's performed for over 2 million people in a lot of different areas. And every time he gets on stage, he does what he does because of his superpower. He calls his superpower ADHD. And so he has an amazing story, and I can't wait for you guys to hear what he has to say. He's part of the Piano Guys, and they've performed in so many venues. You name the venue, they've probably been there. They've been able to do some really incredible things. And his story and what he's going to share with you guys, I hope and I know will impact you guys and help you guys out. You know, he goes and does all of this stuff, but his favorite thing in life is to spend one-on-one time with his wife, which I can relate to with my wife, and his 4 kids. And so I am pleased to introduce to you guys Mr. Stephen Sharp Nilsson.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. That was very nice. Do you do funerals? That was really sweet. That was very, very nice. You know what, Ryan? I really am sad that you didn't mention your credentials.
They're not ready for that.
No, it's because, you see, Ryan was a cellist in the 4th grade.
Wow.
And he did it for 3 months, which is longer than most cellists do it for. And so I'm honored to be introduced by a fellow cellist. Once a cellist, always a cellist. In fact, if I'm recalling right, Ryan, you said your first the first song you learned was right, Eye of the Tiger. That's good stuff, man. That's good. We were having the panel before. Some of you were at the panel, and Ryan turns to me and he's like, "Dude, you're like a disruptive cellist." And I was like, "That's pretty cool." That's gonna be my new byline. That's like, I'll play songs like this. Like when I think of disruptive cellists, this is what I think of. Sorry, I don't have the singing down yet. I'm trying to, it just isn't flowing right, you know? Something about cello and heavy metal don't really mix very well, but I am so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is ADHD. And I want to tell you some of my story, but I want to also talk about how much I love this gift that I have. How many of you have been diagnosed or feel you have ADHD tendencies? I just need you to raise your hand if you want to. Awesome. My people. I'm so glad I get to be in the same room with you. I feel the electricity when I'm around people that have the same kind of brain that jumps around like mine does. It just is exciting for me. So can I play a piece of music for you? How many of you have heard this piece of music right here? Raise your hand if you've heard this piece of music. Oh, isn't that crazy? Do you know that piece of music was written hundreds of years ago? Who was it? Who wrote it? Can I get somebody's brave? Rachmaninoff, good guess, but no. Pachelbel was before this, okay? Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, that's right. Basically the father and the pioneer of which musical period? I'm going to push you even further. Aha! Give that girl a golden star. Okay, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now. The Baroque period of music. And we're going to talk about the Baroque period of music and how it relates to the gifted neurodivergent mind. But I want to set this up by playing a piece of music that is my ADHD theme song. When I was a kid, my dad believed in freedom of choice. He gave me two choices. One was to play a classical instrument and eat, and the other was not. So I decided to go with the first choice, which it's the reason why I'm alive today. He actually, I don't want to give you the impression he was too authoritarian. He actually had this tremendous vision for me as a human being and knew that a string instrument needed to be part of my destiny. And as a string instrument player, it's very unmotivating to start a string instrument. Was it Nick? Is that right? Nick, this is so cool. Will you give Nick a round of applause? He just started the cello. Your goal is to go longer than Ryan did. Do you think you can do that? Okay. 3 months, that's all we got to do. Actually, how long have you been playing? Remind me. 2 weeks. Woohoo! That's exciting. I promise it gets harder, but it gets better, too. So, when you first start playing the cello, do you know what the first stage of string instrument playing is called? I call it the stage. Kind of what it sounds like, right? There are very few instruments in the world, Nick, that you don't even want someone to hear you play it for a year or two. And that's okay. Do you know why I love the cello? And this relates to our minds. See, Nick is in this cool club called ADHD. And our minds have so much potential the way they've been built. But they're harder to manage at first. And that's exactly the way a string instrument is. You see, I always tease my cohort, John Schmidt, the pianist of the Piano Guys. I'm always like, John, what's the big deal? All you're doing is pushing buttons over there. You know, like, what's the big deal? And of course, the piano is excruciatingly difficult. But do you know what is interesting about a string instrument? How many variables would you guess there are in a string instrument? What I mean by variables, how many different ways you can play it? Take a guess. Good guess. It's over 1 million. There's over 1 million ways to play this instrument. You know why? You know why. You're going to discover these ways. There's a fast bow. There's a slow bow. There's a tremolo bow. There's a bounce bow. There's pressure. You can change your pressure with little teeny micro doses of pressure. You can growl like a demon. And you can sing like an angel. Can you believe the same instrument played those two songs back to back? I want us to think about the neurodivergent brain especially ADHD, as a brain that might be difficult at first to manage because it has more variables. But because of more variables, there's more expression. I can go further with this instrument than what it might be typical than like a, let's say, a harmonica. Because a harmonica, you can either blow in or you can blow out, and there's only so many holes, right? But I can go... Right? I mean, crazy. Isn't that awesome? So I want you to think about ADHD. You kids that have this incredible gift, I want you to think about your brain like it's a string instrument. More difficult to learn and play, but when you get to the point where you can express yourself and who you're meant to be through it, it's magic. And it is so cool. So I want to play for you this piece of music, which, I mean, Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, he called it the unaccompanied cello suite number 1 prelude in G major because he didn't have ADHD. So he could do that long title, and he wasn't very good at titles, let's be honest. I just call my version of it the cello song. This is the ADHD supercharged version. As a kid, I thought, Bach wrote this for 1 cello. That's why it's called unaccompanied, right? What if I added 7 more cello parts to the 1 part Bach wrote? I bet he'd love that. And if he doesn't, he's dead. So, you know, big deal. So this is a tribute to Bach, not to take away from him, but to add to his innovation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Bach and Baroque music a little bit later, like I mentioned. But for now, I'm going to cycle through all 8 cello parts, and I want you to observe where I borrowed these parts from. You'll hear a little guitar influence, a little percussion, some film score compositional techniques that I was playing around with. I wanted this to be a living animation, a reanimation of this beautiful classical piece of music that's been loved for hundreds and hundreds of years. So give a big round of applause to Dan, our sound guy, who never gets enough recognition for what he does. Dan, hit it. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. Thank you. This is I want to show you a presentation. I've altered it a little bit. A presentation I was able to put in front of the International ADHD Convention that occurred in Baltimore. And a couple of you, raise your hand if you were there. I know that a couple of you were there. Okay, great. And it was so funny as I was preparing for that conference. One of my best friends, you know, the kind of friend that you keep around because you love, but he tells you the truth. He said, wow. When he heard I was playing this conference, he's like, you finally made it. I was like, what do you mean I finally made it? And I like listed all the places I had played and all the things that I'd done. And I'm like, now you think I've made it? He's like, yeah, because if you can keep that audience's attention, you're the best. So I challenged myself and the whole audience for the next 45 minutes. I hope I could keep your attention. And I want you to know that this presentation was built by ADHD for ADHD. So I hope that it's engaging the whole time. If it isn't, just give me a walking ovation. ADHD is music to my ears. As I mentioned, I love it. Now, let's digress for a little bit. Why are we called the Piano Guys? Some of you know this story. I'm going to back up. This started about 13 years ago. I was always moonlighting as a musician, but my background is in venture capital and all kinds of crazy vocationally ADHD things in my life when I was trying to discover my place. When I hit music, it was because music chose me. I didn't choose music. And that's often the advice I give to kids who want to pursue music professionally. I say it's too hard, but if it chooses you, do it, pursue it. And that's what happened to me. But the Piano Guys, we started when YouTube was young. Let me tell you why we started. It was John Schmidt and I had been playing for some time together. We had gone to the same high school. He just went to it, 60 or 70 years before I did. And he was down in St. George playing a gig at Tuacahn, and he needed a piano to practice on. And he waltzes into this piano store. Paul Anderson, the owner, greets him. Paul Anderson at that time had grown tired of advertising his pianos in his piano store the same way everybody else was advertising pianos. Newspaper ads, radio ads, the kind of places you'd expect to see piano advertisements. And he woke up one morning, he said, I'm getting rid of all of this marketing, and I'm going to try to sell pianos through YouTube. Now today that's not a big deal, right? But back then, man, this was crazy. Nobody was doing this, totally novel. And this is about the time John comes walking into his store and says, can I practice on one of your pianos? He says, of course, John. While you're here, I've got this crazy idea. Could I film you playing on my store pianos, and we'll upload the videos that I've created to a new YouTube channel I've called... Yeah, that was a little slow. Right, the Piano Guys. And then... he takes John by the shoulder, shakes him with this sort of incessant, crazed look in his eye, and he says, we will sell tons of pianos. John pulled me in. I had just moved onto the street serendipitously. I do believe that God can put us in places where we can meet people that help us fulfill the work that he has for us to do. And I believe you can actually pray for that. I'll use spiritual references. I don't mean to be religious exclusively. I want to be inclusive, but I want you to know my heart is rooted in faith. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so I felt like I had prayed this opportunity into my life as best I could. And I had just moved onto the street with Al Vanderbeek, this incredible music producer. He and I were just recording and jamming together. So all of a sudden we had all the tools necessary to build this YouTube music channel to sell pianos as a favor to Paul. Just for fun, right? Doing it on the side. We had no idea it would go anywhere. Well, fast forward to today. We have over 100 videos on YouTube with over 3 billion views, and we have 10 albums with Sony and 10 million social media followers, and we still haven't sold a piano. The good news is cello sales are up, so that's nice. Nick, that's good news for us, isn't it, right? So that's why we're called the Piano Guys. It didn't really work out. So let me just kind of tell you what Plan B looked like. After pianos didn't sell and the piano store actually went out of business. So we decided that we wanted to take the piano and cello out of its original context and put it in places nobody would ever expect to see them. Why? Because we wanted you to feel familiar and unfamiliar about what you were seeing and hearing. We took classical music out of its original context and mashed it up with pop music. Why don't we do the same thing visually? So you can see that these are some of the places I've performed. This is in Disney World, in Avatar Land. This is the only bioluminescent cello in the world. By the way, I have 40 cellos. I'm sorry, we won't get into that. Bioluminescent cello right here. This is us playing on the very edge of Bryce Canyon. Almost died that day. It was really nice. And this one right here on a speeding train when we were playing Vivaldi. Right? Okay, so next we've got, this is the original 89 Batmobile. We played in front of every one of the Batmobiles for our Batman compilation. So we played in front of the Tumbler, the original 89, and then what's the one I'm missing? Oh yeah, even further back, the 1950, what was it, 50s or 60s? 60s, yeah, 66? We've got a connoisseur here, right? So here's us on the beach in Hawaii. That was a rough day. That was Pounders Beach. I know I've got a Maui buddy here. You've been to Pounders, I'm sure. Okay, yeah. This is a Scotland castle, Eilean Castle, that we played in front of and around with a bunch of bagpipers. This is on the Salt Flats, of course. We have lots of Utah locations. Isn't it great that we live in such a diverse location that honestly, when we filmed our Lord of the Rings movie, we had 9 hours of music I condensed into 5 minutes, and we only had a day to film it. So we went down to southern Utah, and within a 15-mile radius, we had snow, mountains, lake, desert, and meadow. Everything Gandalf would have lacked. This is up here, this is on Mars, right there. That's actually Peponi, when we were with Alex Boyer on that cliff. This is me. I did a video called Me and My Cello, where I took my cello around town and just hung out with it. And we videoed it, just to try to emphasize to kids that you need to make best friends with your instrument. All my instruments are named. Nick, does your cello have a name yet? Okay, we got to work on that. This one right here, Dinosaur Museum. This is Berlin. We've played all the major cities. We tried to do fun visual representations of the major cities. We have played on four of the 7 wonders. So we have Machu Picchu Coliseum and Machu Picchu Coliseum and Taj Mahal left. So it's a bit daunting. But can I play just some clips for you of the wonders of the world that we played on, so you can kind of get a feel for that? Here we go. If we get some sound. I sound great right now. That's the best I've ever sounded, in fact. I mean, the problem is, if you don't have the sound, we look even worse. I don't know how that's even possible, but maybe I could sing along with it. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just kidding. So this is the Great Wall of China here we're performing on while they're working on the sound. I'll just kind of demonstrate here. Oh, this was crazy. You'd think, okay, so now, and then we moved on to, anybody been to the Christ Redeemer statue in Rio? Okay, this is an incredible place. This statue stands at the edge of this precipice. I have so many stories I wish I could tell you about doing this video. And then we also filmed in front of the Iguazu Falls, a natural wonder of the world. Just waterfalls as far as the eye can see. Absolutely just breathtakingly gorgeous. Almost died that day too, but it was worth it. There I am on the edge, very, very edge. Waterfalls in the background. You know, I've never really understood when it's talked about in ancient scripture that God's voice is like the rushing of many waters, until I got there to that location. I felt the power and the peace of it. Of course, we filmed it in front of Petra. What are you going to play in front of Petra? This is the Indiana Jones theme. You can just kind of imagine that going on in your head while we're waiting for audio. See, maybe your head is actually playing it better than even I did. Those are real camels, and that's a real whip that we used. So this... we actually did use, so that's no green screen, folks. That's the real deal right there. This, and then to round it off, this is this right here, Chichen Itza in Mexico. We were the only musicians that I know of that have been allowed to play on top of the actual ruins. And there's a reason for that. So that's Chichen Itza. We showed up at Chichen Itza. We've had so many miracles like this in the piano guys. We showed up at Chichen Itza, and we're talking, and the head of all the archaeological sites of Mexico happens to be there. And he says, "What's going on here?" And I say, "Oh, well, we're just trying to get permission to play here because, you know, we're the piano guys." And he gets this sort of ashen look on his face. And he says, "I can't let you play here, and I can't let you play on top of the ruins because that's what we were asking for." And then he pauses. And he says, "But if I don't, my children will never forgive me." So he let us play on top. He doesn't work there anymore. Actually, I hope he does. He's the coolest guy. We actually FaceTimed his kids while we were doing the music video, which was so fun, and that's why we got there. Any luck with the sound? You want to? Okay, right there. Let me do. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, you played it in your head better than I could have. Okay, so we played in all kinds of iconic concert halls. This is sort of a picture of one of those here. Just to give you kind of an idea, and there's a reason why I'm telling you all this stuff. It's not out of hubris, I promise. Sold out Carnegie Hall, Red Rocks, Sydney Opera House, Buca. Now remember, I'm a cellist. Like what? This is not Bon Jovi we're talking about here. Someone cool. HSBC Hall, Royal Albert Hall, Star Theater, appeared on the Today Show, the Tonight Show, Good Morning America, The One Show, The Mario Barth Show, an event for the President of the United States. Our content is streamed 3 million times every day. Just to kind of wrap your head around that number, in the time of this presentation, it'll be 8 NBA-sized basketball arenas have experienced the Piano Guys music as we're sitting here for 45 minutes. Total now it's actually over 3 billion now, but this is a little older slide. Why am I telling you all this? Well, I want to talk to you about, first of all, I have to give credit to my parents, especially my dad. My dad is my superhero. He's so awesome. I lost him last year and I miss him very much. He never gave up on me, despite being encouraged to do so by several music teachers. And he was at every cello lesson and he was by my side. He was always my biggest cheerleader. So I'm on the stage because of him. And I always publicly thank God for all the answered prayers that have put me on the stage too, because there have been many of those. And I also want to thank my superpower, ADHD, for putting me on this stage. Learning to channel that, and I told this in the panel, when I was in junior high. Nick, how old are you? Okay, so when I was about your age, my dad was noticing that my grades were down, my friendships were not sticking, and he came to me and he said, Steve, you're a smart kid, you're a fun kid, what is wrong? And I said, Dad, I don't know. All I know is I'm looking around in class and everybody's laser focused on the teacher and all I feel like doing is standing up, running around and slapping somebody. I still feel like that most of the time, in fact. So my dad took me to a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with ADHD. I didn't know what that meant. The only thing I remember is I walked out of that office in tears because I thought it meant I was broken. And ever since then, with the help of music and several other things, but primarily music, I have discovered that ADHD is my superpower. And I preach this because if you have this gift, kids especially, if you have this gift, you are going to do incredible things with it. You're meant to have it. It is a beautiful gift. When it comes to hyper-focus and creativity, there's nothing better. I've experienced this. When it comes to general focus, it's not so good. Not very good. That's okay. That's okay, right? Two sides of this coin. We're going to talk about both sides of the coin. So they're starting to experiment with some brain scans of neurodivergent youth and adults, trying to discover in the prefrontal cortex what really is happening. And they're making some headway, so to speak, in this process, but they also have discovered that they really can't pinpoint it, at least yet. But I actually did a brain scan. I was curious. I'm like, I want to see what's really going on. What is really going on? So I had someone sit across from me during the brain scan and tell me a wandering story. You know, the kind that's like, well, when I was 4, I had this, well, actually, I wasn't really 4, I think it was 5. And when I was 5, I had started the viola. No, it wasn't a viola. Was it a viola? No, I think it was, and it was just like, with ADHD, if somebody does that, I'm like, and then we did the brain scan, and this is what they discovered. You see in the prefrontal cortex, if you look very carefully, there's a little bit of a blip there that's going on. So I said, will you zoom in on that? And this is what they found. I understand so much more about myself now. Makes sense. That's the famous Joe Ronaldo who played. This is such a cool little contraption they did for silent movies, and I love it because it represents often what my brain is going through. But look at how cool all of those little apparati are. We can either look at that and say that's a mess, or we can either look at that and say that's dynamic creativity in action. And I choose the second one, of course. So I want to talk to you about, when we talk about neurodivergence, a lot of people, it's almost getting cool to say you have ADHD, which is awesome. That's great. So a lot of people are sort of claiming that they have it, whether they have it or not, which is great. That's fine. But I kind of sort of use a little bit of a simple diagnosis, not to give an official diagnosis, but I say, okay, if you have ADHD, I want you to see if this is what your brain looks like when you're overthinking, when we're ruminating, when we're caught in a thought cycle. Is this what overthinking looks like? Oh my goodness. I go through that so many times. That's totally what overthinking looks like, right? Don't you love the visual representation of that, right? Okay, so that's overthinking. What about when I want to start a task? This is often what it looks like when I want to start a task. I love how she's like, do I keep going or do I just kind of give up at this point, That's what it looks like. Now, when I actually do get engaged in a task, this is what it tends to look like. Oh, light bulb's out. Get the light bulbs. No, wait. No, the shelf isn't working. Oh, that's squeaky. Get the WD-40. Oh, it's out. Go to Home Depot. Car's not starting.
Al, can you replace that light bulb in the kitchen?
What does it look like I'm doing?
I have said that before. And those of you who are blessed with ADHD, you probably have said something like that before. Aren't you going to do this? And you're thinking, I am doing that, even though it doesn't look like I'm doing that. I'm totally doing that. I'm working my way toward it. So that's kind of the little sort of strap diagnosis that's completely unofficial that I run guys through, right? So now we're going to talk about something else. This is Mozart when he was a child. In 2007, scientists decided to embark upon a study to discover whether or not Mozart could be diagnosed with ADHD. Posthumously, right? So they studied his letters, his life, anecdotes from so many stories relate things like this happen all the time with Mozart, where he'd sit down and he'd improvise with somebody and blow everybody away, and then shortly thereafter would go around and do somersaults around the room and make cat noises and play with people's hair. And so with using anecdotes and letters and other things, their scientific opinion is Mozart's movements and behavior points to several elements of the composer's behavior, which may indicate the presence of ADHD during his childhood and extending to his adult years. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I'm going to agree with that. So first of all, before I talk about Mozart, I'm going to talk a little bit about Mozart that's going to help us understand ADHD a little bit more. But I want to show you Mozart's dog first. We actually discovered Mozart's dog. I wanted to show you that real quick. That's Mozart's dog. When I was a kid, Mozart, now Ryan, if you would have gotten to the point where you went past Eye of the Tiger and got to Mozart, you could relate to me on this maybe, but maybe next year. Mozart is miserable for cellists. Most of his repertoire is, if you focus solely on the cello part. Do you know why? Do you want to hear a Mozart cello part? Let me sum it up for you. That's about it. That actually could really superimpose almost over every Mozart piece of music. And as a kid, I hated Mozart. I didn't want to play it because it triggered my ADHD, and I just didn't understand why this cool composer that was supposed to be one of the best songwriters of all time could only write those notes for the cello. But then I discovered as I took a step back and recognized the majesty and glory and beauty of Mozart's music and didn't focus solely on the cello part, understanding that as a foundation for the rest of it, I fell in love with Mozart's music. This is the problem that we have with society right now. We're focusing on the cello part aspect of ADHD. We're calling it a disorder. We're focusing in on the disorder aspect of it. And therefore, when people are diagnosed, this is what they're feeling about their life, being destined to do this their whole life, right? Being in this toxic, vicious cycle of not being able to be neurotypical, whatever the heck that means, right? We don't know what that means if you're ADHD. So, my point is remind people when you're working with this, Ammon, you work with people, remind them that if they're focused on the Mozart bass part, they're not going to understand the glory and majesty and the beauty of the gift that they have. So we need to step back and recognize it as a whole in order to take in what it really means. Along with those lines, speaking of Mozart, now we've talked about some of the funny aspects of ADHD and the tendencies that we have that might inhibit us at times, make it difficult for us. Let's talk about my favorite 2 things that I have discovered with ADHD that I love and I use every single day. First of all, let's look at Mozart. What is so special about Mozart? Do you know how many pieces of music Mozart wrote? Take a guess. Now remember, these are not pop songs, right? Little teeny sugar donut bites, donut holes. These are operas and symphonies. How many do you think? Just throw out a number, I'm just curious. 200 is a good guess?
50.
50?
500.
500, that's a great guess.
A lot.
A lot. That's correct. Thank you. That's exact. In fact, it's scientifically a lot means 600 works. Now, if he lived to 80 years old, that still would be impressive. But when did Mozart die? He died in his 30s. So we're going to give benefit of the doubt. First of all, Mozart was writing when he was 3 and 4 years old. Yeah, thanks, Mozart, for helping us to feel like we're garbage. You know, he wrote his first symphony at 8. Oh, good for you, Mozart. Okay. I'm going to give him 27 years of real composition, right? He was a little sick at the end, too. He didn't finish a lot of the pieces of music. 600 works, 240 hours. That equates to 4,800 pop songs, if you put it in a pop song length. 50 symphonies, 26 string quartets, blah, blah, blah. So many. This is as if he were writing an average of 1 song every other day of his life. What is my point? How many of you can recognize a melody if I go da-da-dun, 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 da-da-dun? Do you recognize that as Mozart, right? That's an awesome symphony. How about dun 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 dun, right? But you know what? If I sang the other 550 pieces of music, would you recognize them? You wouldn't. Guess what? Mozart wrote some duds. And he's the greatest songwriter, arguably, to ever have lived. But a secret of Mozart's success is his prolificacy. Remember that word. ADHD can offer the opportunity for us to be prolific. My favorite thing in music, and in speaking, but in music, is one of the best words of the English language, resonance. When you resonate with somebody or something resonates with you, isn't that a special moment, right? This is the reason why I loved cello. When my dad made me take violin when I was 6 years old, I couldn't stand it because it triggered my ADHD senses and we didn't even know why I couldn't stand it, but I just couldn't stand the feeling of it. So when I could sit with my cello, he handed me the cello. After a year, I quit the violin and I'm like, oh, I could quit. I didn't know I could quit. And the next day he brings home a cello and I'm like, what's this? I quit. He's like, yeah, you quit the violin, but here's your next instrument. And I put the cello against my heart and could feel it resonating in my soul. Do you know what the first piece of music I played on the cello was? I'm going to play it for you. mean, that was so awesome because the way it vibrated with me, it resonated with me in so many ways that I knew that I was destined to play this instrument. And as many times as I threatened to give up, my father always called me on the bluff because he knew it too. When something resonates with you, look for that resonance in your life. And Mozart had 600 times to resonate with you. Most of us fear failure so much, and we don't start enough, we don't just get into it enough, we're worried about writing garbage that we don't write garbage and we can't get to the good stuff. Be prolific with your gift of ADHD and you will have more opportunities to resonate with others. It is a beautiful aspect of the ADHD gift. Next, I love this too. Think about this. I always talk about how Mozart always relished in the music is not in the notes, but in the space between. I want you to interpret that the way you want to interpret it, but the way I interpret it is if I am into the music and the joy of it, I can let go of the toxic perfectionism and be able to resonate better with my audiences because they can feel my heart is in it. And that's in between the notes. If we focus on the notes, we lose the music. This is my second favorite thing of ADHD. I call it the subtle science of self-suggestibility. I love this. How many of you have played this game? It's called Telestrations. Raise your hand, because I just want to see. Raise your hands. Did you have fun? Tell me your name again.
Coco.
That's right, Coco. Did you have fun with the game? What did you like about it?
That people don't know what other things look like.
The other people are really bad artists. That's actually really apparent right away, right? Because we're under a time crunch, right? Other Telestration players. Who's played Telestrations over here? What did you like about it?
Oh, it's just the beginning, or the end is not even close to the beginning.
Isn't that fun? That's the fun part. See, this is the problem, is we look at ADHD and we get from one place to another and we get criticized for it. But I think it's actually not that. I think it's it's complete opposite. This is a great way to explain ADHD brain to a lot of people, is to use this visual reference. So basically how this works is, you remember the old telephone game where you'd whisper a phrase into somebody's ear and then it would go around the circle, and by the time it got to the end, it was a mess. It was totally different. They do this in this game, but with illustrations. So I'll draw a picture, pass it to somebody, they guess what they think the picture is, then they pass the word, then the next person draws what they guessed. And by the time you finish, this is kind of what it ends up being. First, it started with lunch lady, and you can see the next pane is, that could look like a lunch lady, but the next person guessed Paula Deen, a famous chef. So somebody drew Paula Deen as best as they could, then that became Humpty Dumpty. Then Humpty Dumpty, who looks like a broken egg off a wall, becomes Eskimo pie. And then you can see, we went from lunch lady to Eskimo pie. And we laugh about it, we joke about it, we criticize it even, but I gotta tell you, self-suggestibility has been one of the greatest gifts I could ever have asked for in the Piano Guys. I have thought of and created things that normally the prefrontal cortex would have disallowed because it wasn't related enough. I could entertain such random propositions and thoughts that I could sit with my cello and in the middle of arranging Adele's Rolling in the Deep. You remember that one? We got to the second verse, and in instrumental music, I don't know if you knew this, but there's no words. So it gets really boring because Adele, she sings the second verse the same way she sings the first one. She just changes the words. Well, that doesn't help when you're playing cello. So I was sitting there and I'm like, this arrangement is lame, it's boring, it's going nowhere. And all of a sudden as I'm playing, this famous melody. Now, if you don't know that, that's a very famous melody from a piece called Jupiter. Gustav Holst wrote a suite of symphonies for each planet in our solar system. And that's from Jupiter, and it's this incredibly inspiring melody. And it fit perfectly with Adele. So I could play it right over the top. And I credit the ADHD art of self-suggestibility that allowed that thought and entertained it long enough for me to incorporate into that piece of music, which launched that piece into virality. It totally was viral after that. Otherwise, it just would have been a benign arrangement on cello that you would hear in the elevator. So that's something that I want you to consider and recognize in yourself, that you need to treat your thoughts as you're wading out into the ocean. And often we look at waves, maybe the neurotypical brain, I don't know, maybe you would look at a wave and decide that's probably too big, I'm gonna step back, or I'm gonna wait, or I'm gonna jump over it, I'm gonna dive under it, But the neurodivergent brain, if harnessing the power of self-suggestibility, will move beyond that wave. Look for entertain a bunch of waves, look for a really good one, grab a surfboard and surf it into shore. And this is the subtle science of self-suggestibility, gift that ADHD has. So right here, I'm going to play this right here, so I'm going to move on here. Okay, so let's talk about some Baroque music. I talked about Baroque music. This is the three Baroque boys, I call them. George Frederick Handel. What did Handel write? Among many other things, what's that? Water music, good. What else? Messiah, I heard. Yes, boy, was he amazing. Johann Sebastian Bach, we've heard some of his pieces of music, so many. And Antonio Lucio Vivaldi was a prolific composer in his own right. Incredible concerto grossi that he wrote. So I asked AI actually to draw me a picture if these three Baroque composers were in a boy band. That's what AI came up with. That's pretty good, isn't it? So that's the Baroque boys. Why is Baroque music so important for the ADHD brain? Well, before the Baroque period was the medieval period. Now, you know what this is because you've heard it before. In fact, back in the 90s, there was this resurgence of Gregorian chant. Do you guys remember that, where all of a sudden it was super popular? Isn't that funny? And everybody was like in their cars like, I'm like, what is this? This is the weirdest trend ever. But you have to understand, Gregorian music and medieval period music was primarily monophonic, which is a very fancy word of saying one melody at a time. Just. Sometimes they'd add a fifth or a dominant or a tonic. Bach comes onto the scene and he writes, and things like, right? And all of a sudden everybody's like, all the parents were like, you can't listen to that music. That actually happened. Do you know that? His music was considered racy. I'm gonna go clubbing tonight with Baroque boys. Isn't that funny? But the reason why our brain, ADHD, likes Baroque music in particular, because it's the most fluid and consistently in motion music that's ever been written. It tends to have a dynamicity that is consistent, rather than romantic music like a Beethoven, for instance, right? Really high highs, really low lows. Baroque music primarily stayed at a consistent dynamic, but constantly moved. And they have done tremendous studies scientifically on what this does for our brain. It actually motivates our synapses to better communicate with one another. So my advice for any neurodivergent brain, especially ADHD, is incorporate more Baroque music into your playlists. All right? And I have, this is actually, they did research on what really are the best pieces of music. And there are a lot of these, you see some from the Romantic period. Most of these are Baroque pieces, but I've actually done a favor for you and I've created a playlist for you. So you can access this. I call this ADHD Classical. This is a great playlist to put. You don't have to sit and listen to it because it's a very long, oh, by the way, I put a few Piano Guys pieces in there just because I want you to hear how we mashed up some Baroque music too. But put this in the background when you're studying, when you're driving, when you're doing housework. Just give it a try and please push shuffle Because if you don't push shuffle, you'll get a lot of homogeneity because you'll get like 6 movements of Brandenburg concertos. So shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. But I want you to see what this does to your brain. Observe what happens. Scientific studies suggest that actually it will improve your cognitive processes. So there you go. You're welcome from the Baroque boys.
It says the link's expired.
Oh no, you're kidding me. That's horrible. Okay, I tell you what. I don't know why. Is that really true? Is that what's happening? Oh, how horrible is that?
What's it called?
We'll send it out.
So look on Spotify, ADHD Classical, but I'll have Nate send it out to everybody. Thank you. That'll be great. QR codes. I didn't know they expired. It's like milk. Okay. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about here, a couple last things here is, these are lots of quotes. We could pull up a bunch of quotes. Music therapy. How many of you have actually heard of music therapy? I'm guessing it's most of us, right? How many have interacted with music therapists? Look how few hands went up. Music therapy is an emerging field. It's making incredible headway into healing. When it first was introduced, traditional medicine shunned it and considered it novelty and superfluous, not efficacious in one bit, but they're finding that it really is making a big difference. But what I would suggest, music therapy already has proven that in scientific studies, it now has finally proving that music can be healing, even more so than traditional medicinal techniques. What I would suggest, and this doesn't exist, but this is the reason why I'm here today, because Nate promised me, actually he hasn't promised me, but I want him to promise me that this is going to happen. I want there to be a subspecialty of music therapy called music empowerment. And I'm going to explain what that means. If we can use music in our public education system, in our homes, to better help our kids and adults, but kids specifically, channel their gift of ADHD, we would be in a much better place. Music was my Ritalin. It's funny to say that, but it really was my way of channeling the gift side of ADHD. Let me show you one study. Now, studies are just emerging because this is new territory. This is very new territory. This is incredible. I love this. The effect of drum training on neurodivergent adolescents. When parents come to me and they're having a very difficult time with their children, I ask them, the first question I ask them is your child engaged in music? And most of the time, the answer is no. And so I say, okay, let's start small and easy. Let's start with the drums. Why? Because it's cool. You can play all kinds of fun stuff that your kids are already listening to, play along with it. It's not very expensive. You don't need lessons. You can take lessons on YouTube, or you could just start beating around just already. And so I call it the low-hanging fruit. I want parents to progress past drums, and I want them to get into piano and string instruments or wind instruments. I think that develops both sides of the brain really tremendously. But this is interesting. They did this study where they took a group of kids and they said, we found strong evidence that drumming reduces hyperactivity and attention difficulties and increases functional connectivity in brain regions responsible for inhibitory control, action outcome monitoring, and self-regulation. These are a bunch of terms you're very familiar with, right, Emin? The results are highlighted in the results also highlighted the central role of the prefrontal cortex in regulating motor impulsivity. The fidgets, the fidget quality, it's not just having a fidget in your fingers. This actually is lasting. When a child is engaged in music, and this is, in this case, drums, they found a 30% decrease in hyperactivity and inattention. That's so significant. That is extremely significant. So the moral of this scientific study is engage any child that has diagnosed or has ADHD tendencies, engage them in music. Next thing I want to talk about, this is also a critical component too. Our public education funding is so dismal for music. This is the reason why this is one of the main reasons why we have so much hyperactivity and ADHD diagnoses that are coming out. We're sitting these poor kids at this desk for 8 hours a day and we're eliminating the things that can help them be creative. Look at this. Music education has 0.25% of the budget. Let me put that in context. If I said, I'm going to give you, was it Michael? Let's see, Michael, right? I'm going to give you $1,000 to spend on your child's education. That's pretty good, right? For a year of education, for supplies, whatever. How much of that would be for music? $1. $1. That's wrong. You in your influential circles and everywhere you go, advocate for more funding for music education. I promise this will decrease the negative aspects of ADHD and increase the positive aspects of the creative superpower that we know and love. I'll show you some studies. Every child that's engaged, not every, excuse me, most children that are engaged in music as part of their education, every test score goes up. Math, reading, science, social studies, all of these, language studies, handicraft goes up, for heaven's sakes. It's developing both sides of the brain and allowing them to get so much of their energy out in such a positive way that it's increasing their connectivity and their focus when it comes to other subjects. So my plea with all of you is that we've got to move from STEM to STEAM. Let's move from STEM to STEAM. We've got to add arts into the equation. And I promise things will get better. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I will tell you how I've renamed it. And a lot of my cohort in this wonderful community that we're in have discovered what they want to call it. For me, it's attention, deliberate, hyper-focused discernment. And that tells you how much I love this gift, and I've grown to love it and discovered. And that's a lot of words, obviously, for us. So I just simply break it down, call it my superpower. Now I want to do this. I'm just going to play one last song for you, and then I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you again so much for letting me be part of your evening and for taking time out to listen to a nerdy cellist ramble. I'm so grateful that we're in this together. I really, truly believe all the things that I've been talking about. I'm hoping that we can make music the way, a primary objective and a primary way to channel this incredible gift in our youth that's being so misunderstood and so mistreated. And I believe that we could do that at home, in the public education system, at work, wherever they may be, wherever any of us are. I believe that we could do that. So I want to play for you. I'm going to do some music empowerment with you. I'm going to play one of my favorite classical pieces ever. And I'll finish with this. It's called Nessun Dorma. Raise your hand if you've heard it. Okay, this is such a great piece of music. Puccini was the ultimate opera composer. He wrote in such a melodic way that it draws you in. Nessun Dorma means no one sleeps. I want you to think about how this piece, it's not a very long piece, but it wanders for a little bit. It wanders around trying to find its place. It's dissonant for a little while, and then you'll recognize that there's this moment in the piece of music when light shines in and everything makes sense and everything feels right and is beautiful. So whether you want to close your eyes during this or not is up to you, but if you want to close your eyes, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to visualize an aspect of yourself that has been labeled as negative or treated as negative or something you're struggling with, a burden perhaps. And I want you to listen to how this piece of music wanders around, and when that piece of music lands on this beautiful section that you'll recognize right away, I want you to feel the change that occurs in you, the perspective change that occurs on you and the thing that you're working with inside of yourself. I want you to connect with the part of yourself that believes in yourself, and I want you to connect with the divine. As Bach said, music is for us to connect with the divine. And as you're doing that, I want you to slough off all the negativity. Everything that has been caked on an aspect of who you are. And I want you to get rid of it. And I want you to feel who you really are and what you're meant to become. This is Nessun Dorma. very nice. Thank you. I appreciate you letting me be here. Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That's very nice. This is the walking ovation we were talking about. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that. I don't know about you, during the very beginning of that piece, No One Sleeps,
Yes.
I felt something. I felt that connection that he was talking about. And almost for a moment, felt like I started to levitate almost. I felt a little bit of like a lift. And
Love
it
that.
It was off-putting for a second, kind of like when you almost fell off the cliff.
Yes, right.
And that's kind of that title, No One Sleeps. That really hits it on the head with how neurodivergency feels sometimes.
Yeah.
Like it's never quiet. And sometimes it's beautiful music. And sometimes it's just noise. And everything that Steve has talked about tonight, everything that the panel talked about earlier today, are just pieces of a big puzzle that really address the humanity in all of us. When we say neurotypical, like I said, I don't know what neurotypical is. I've never met one person that's exactly the same as another. So this idea of neurotypical doesn't really land with me. And I think with a lot of you as well. The older I get, the more I appreciate the differences in everybody. Of course, when I was younger and learning how to drive, nobody drove right, only I did. I guess that's still kind of the case. Everybody's on my freeways, and that's the problem. But I wanted to bring you all together here. I wanted Steve to be here so badly. That just to start this conversation and open our eyes to see that there's more that we can do from a place that starts with the kids in our lives, with the individuals in our lives, instead of starting from this big problem of education needs to be fixed or society needs to be fixed. We really just need to understand each other. And that's where we start, to see the healing, to see the beauty in everybody around us, and in the different minds that are around us, even just in this room. I want to thank Silicon Slopes for hosting us here, this location. I want to thank our anonymous donor who provided the food. You can give him a hearty hand. Our anonymous donor. I want to thank Kids on the Move for co-hosting this event with us. And to all of you for being here and to supporting us with your ears and your minds and your hearts. We look forward to many more encounters with you and hope you have a safe ride home. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks again, man. It was fun to have a reunion, right? It's our Baltimore reunion.